Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to another reader event, one of a number that we've been having in recent times, and with a lot of success and a lot of good feedback. We aim to have these on a regular basis, and really encourage your thoughts as well about topics, members of staff that you think you'd like to tackle in full force combat on stage at some stage in the future. So we're up for it, that's for sure. Tonight's topic is a really interesting one, and one where there are many views and contested debates. It's on the issue of our letters page, our op-ed page, our opinion writing, and the process of editorials. Now, normally at these occasions, I stand up and say a few opening remarks and then happily go back there somewhere. But tonight, in terms of the questions about editorials, of which I both initiate and sign off on, you've got me to tackle as well. It's interesting, I think, when it comes to these issues, that tonight's op-ed page, reflective of our serious masthead slogan of independent always, that we have a columnist, actually Alan Stokes, writing about us, Fairfax, and about some of the issues that have been detailed in yet another book by a former Fairfax colleague about the travails that are affecting our company. We don't shy away from debate about ourselves. We actually encourage it. We think that's a good thing, a sign of strength rather than a sign of weakness. Our editorial tonight is on the incredible case of our journalistic colleague Peter Grester in Egypt. It's sadly one of those editorials that writes itself, but that's what we've got on the in the leader section today, and it's also a topic that is of great interest to you, our readers, and is the lead letter on the letters page tomorrow. Just in terms of introduction, in terms of the Herald and where we're at the moment, we're in a frightfully good shape, actually, and not least because of your loyalty and faith in us. We've just celebrated another milestone in what they call the EMA metrics, which is the Enhanced Media Metrics Australia results, which records the amount of readership that we have across our printed products and our digital products. And it shows that far and away we are the biggest and most appreciated masthead in Australia. That's both, gratifying, but also humbling as well, and gives us a really big sense of the seriousness with which we're taken in the community and just the responsibilities that we have in Australia, but also to our readers. I'd also like to point out that we're joined by a number of people who aren't on stage here tonight. One is the what we claim is legendary, and rightly so, Sydney Morning Herald columnist and staffer Damien Murphy, trying to remain anonymous up there. Hand up, Damien, and his good wife. There he is, a great journalist. And Rob Ashton, I think I saw earlier tonight. Hey, Rob, good to see you. Now, Rob is an unsung hero, and I'm glad he's here, and I'm able to acknowledge he's present. Rob is in charge of our team of comment moderators, those people who actually police and try to ensure there is a sense of decorum in terms of the comments that are posted on the stories that we put online. And it's interesting that we're just about to expand that service. Rob will be at the helm of an expanded service that will see those comments opened and monitored and moderated 7 days a week around the clock, which is something that we've been wanting to do for a long time, and I'm really pleased that that's happening and that Rob's going to be at the helm of that. He's a fantastic person to have there. So thank you, Rob. And the Herald is unlike many comparable newsrooms around the world. We actually do moderate our comments. Comparable newsrooms around the world actually have robots that try their best to ensure that the engagement is appropriate. But anyway, that's enough in terms of introduction. You have a fine array of panellists here this evening. and in no particular order, but ladies first, Mark.
Go ahead.
In the middle, Julie Lewis is our co-letters editor. She shares that job with Mark, and Julie was a Herald cadet. She's reported, like many of our staff, on a varied array of things: crime, education, politics and industrial relations. She was once the Herald's Melbourne correspondent before we became friendly with the Age.
Yes, the office was near the men's toilets.
Is that right?
That was in the high esteem that the Age held, the Sydney Morning Herald Melbourne correspondent in.
Yes. She's lived and worked with her husband, who's also here tonight, in Russia and the United States. And when she returned to Australia, she's been involved in various editing roles, not least on the foreign desk, before she's come on board as a fantastic letters co-editor. Last year, she co-edited a very interesting book called Pardon Me for Mentioning. As some of you may have that. It's a catalogue of the letters that, for one reason or another, we didn't publish in the newspaper, and is quite a tale indeed. Helen Pitt is alongside me. She is the editor of our much-loved opinion page, and also is responsible for the opinion pieces that don't make it to the printed product, but actually do make it to our online sites. Now, Helen started at the Herald when she was asked as a 16-year-old to write a review of the teen film Puberty Blues. Now, it's a little
Don't
bit...
look that old, do I?
That's what I was about to say. Everyone's now sort of calculating your age out there. She began as a cadet with the Herald. They call them trainees now. We like to still call them cadets. In 1986, also worked as a Melbourne correspondent.
That makes three of us, indeed.
I don't know where you were located. Religious affairs reporter and a general reporter, freelance writer at the Bulletin, and a TV reporter at Euronews in France. And she's come back to the Herald in 2010 after more than a decade reporting and living in the United States, and she's a fantastic opinion editor. And welcome, Helen. And Mark, up the end here, he's also done more than 25 years as a journalist. He's worked in 6 countries, including, which I didn't know, shamefully, until today, 7 years for the United Nations in the former Yugoslavia during the conflict there. Pretty apt for the issues of the day. At Fairfax, he's been a production editor. He's been a literary editor for the Sun Herald. He's also been the acting literary editor for the Herald, and still maintains a close association with our book section. And he now co-edits the letters page for the Herald and the Sun Herald. So they're our wonderful panellists tonight. So how we'll go is to, I think each of them are yearning to say something. They're now looking at me saying, "You've hogged the stage for far too long, get on with it," and I will. And
don't know who you are.
Oh!
We just pulled him off the street.
That's a rare moment, me not boasting about it. My name's Darren Goodsir. I'm the editor-in-chief of the Sydney Morning Herald and the Sun Herald. And it's my role and task and privilege to be responsible for the running of the newspaper, and vaguely responsible for what these great people do across print, the website, the mobile site, our social media sites, and any other iteration that we appear on. So thank you for bringing that to my attention. All right, so we're going to say some brief statements. Based on previous events, the Q&A is the best part rather than what we say, and so we'll try and restrict our comments accordingly. There'll be a microphone passed around for those of you who wish to say something, so just wait until that comes to you before beaming in. But I don't know what the batting order is. Have you worked that out?
I can start.
Mark McEvoy.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Thanks, Darren. On Saturday, I ran a letter by a regular contributor, and I won't mention his name in case he's here and he doesn't want me to, but he said, and I'll quote him here, he said, "Since the Abbott government was elected, writing letters has become more and more difficult. There are just too many issues." Obviously very tongue-in-cheek, but he had a good point about what we do, and we write about issues on the letters page. And of course, Julie and I are mere gatekeepers for all of you who write letters, and it really is a forum for your voice. It's a place where you can express your opinion, your ideas, your grievances, your complaints, and it's not a place that we try to waste space with letting politicians have their say about what their message is or what companies or interest groups want to do in spruiking their ideas. We try and reserve it for the readers of our paper. So what I might do now is just give you a little rundown about what the process is for producing the page, and that might give you a bit of insight, not only about how we do it, but also what's the best time for you to write a letter. When I come in the morning around 9 o'clock, there are usually a couple of 100 letters already in the in tray. And I'll call them letters, but they're emails, but for tradition's sake, we call them letters. And we can expect through the course of the day up to about 400 letters. So we have a big task ahead of us of working out which are the most interesting letters to do with the most topical issues of the day. In that first couple of hours of work, we work out the left-hand page by writing, this is the way I operate, I'm not sure how you operate, but I write a list of what are the main issues of the day, and I formulate what's going to go on that left page as the lead issue, as well as what the box letter is down, and you're probably all familiar with that. And that takes up about 700 words, 6 to 8 letters for the lead issue, and the box letter is about 200 words, and we usually run a single issue in that, which is separate from the lead issue. That goes up till about lunchtime, working that out for me.
Oh, I'd finished by 11.
We send that off to the sub-editors, and they do their work on it. And then from lunchtime to about mid-afternoon, I work out what's going to go on the right page, which is the main body of letters, which is usually about 12 to 15 letters, and it's 900 words, and it's a whole list of those issues I've worked out for the day. And in doing that, it takes us up to a point where we can't really consider too many more letters after a certain time, which is usually about 3:30, 4 o'clock, because we have deadlines to meet for production, and also the sub-editors who put the pages together for us have got to get the page off the floor by 5:30. So that's quite important to us to meet that deadline. So what I'm letting you know is the most important letters that we consider, and the ones that make the core of the letters page, come between about 6 a.m. and 9 a.m. and that's when people respond to the letters page. That's when people wake up over their cornflakes, which many people tell me they spill as they read the issues. They write their letters, and we have to do that for production reasons, but we do consider letters through the rest of the day, but it's those first few hours of the day that are the most important. Now, also we have to consider deadlines, and we have to meet those, so that restricts us. We have legal ramifications for certain letters. Some people who get very passionate might say very nasty things about people. We've got to make sure that that's not published. We send letters off to lawyers to check for that reason. We have to make sure all the facts in the letters are correct, because people also, in the passion of the moment, forget what the actual facts are when they write their letters. So we've got to check all of that. And then, of course, we put down most of our work, as I said, by 5:30 on the print version, but at midnight, the digital version goes off as well. So that's quite important. But anyway, I just thought I'd let you know how that works, and I just want to stress, get your letters in early. So I think Julie now is going to give you a bit of advice about how to write the perfect letter.
Yes, so there's a bit of self-interest in this, isn't there, for us? We're going to train you all up, get writing early, what to write, cut down the work for us. So out of all of that maelstrom, we're trying to create a page that is lively and diverse in its topics, and also in the opinions that are covered, and the approaches to the stories that are tickling people's fancy during the day, and give a sense of what's riling up Sydney, what's getting people's juices flowing. So one of the things that we're looking for in the perfect letter is well written. And what do I mean by well written? I mean well argued, tightly argued, logically argued, and I like a playful use of the language. I don't know if any of you saw the letter last week that ended with the term or the sort of the imprecation. Oh well, but wombats might waltz, and I just printed that because I loved I love the image of wombats waltzing. So if you can sort of play with the language a bit, I think that makes your letter stand out. Something that's evocative. The ideas. So sometimes there's an idea, a reaction that a lot of people will have to a particular story, and in that case we're going to pick the most well-written person that expresses that idea. But then if someone comes up with a reaction that is completely out of left field and is just a little more thoughtful, maybe draws on their personal experience or their personal and professional knowledge and takes us to another place and shows us something that we haven't read elsewhere in the coverage of the news item, then that's also going to at least make our short list and be hard for us to ignore. Humour. Love a funny letter. They're quite difficult to write. It's quite difficult to get the tone, and some people can not perhaps go too far into being a little personal, but a funny line is something we look for, and people who can write those short letters are real gems, I have to say. Timely, so particularly in this 24/7 news cycle, while our letters are not going to be as up to the minute as, say, the comment page or Twitter, and we don't want them to be, we still want them to be reflective of the stories of the day. So if you're writing about something, if you've read the Saturday newspaper 2 days late, and I know some people do, and that's great, but your letter on a topic from that page would have to be very, very good to make it in, because by that stage the conversation has moved on. So really trying to make your letters pegged to something that's going on in that day's paper is going to give you a better chance of getting in. And also to our paper. I know none of you would do this, but don't write me a letter about someone else's newspaper. Send it to them. You'd be surprised at how many people do that. And just housekeeping stuff. Don't send the letter to lots of newspapers. We only like to print letters that have been sent specifically to us, because we have so many people trying to get in the paper. We think we're going to give priority to the people who really want their letter in the Sydney Morning Herald, not wherever they can get it printed. Shorter is better. 120 words is nice. You know, Twitter only gets you 140 characters. You can get 120 words with a letter. Name, address, telephone number. If I have to write to you and say, I love your letter, I'm considering it, but you need to give me your name, address and telephone number, by the time you get back to me, I might have already moved on, and those deadlines, those crucial deadlines that Mark was talking about, have passed, and that the moment's gone. And also, as Mark was saying, with facts, if you have a fact in your letter that maybe isn't going to be easily checked, it's not in the news story, it's not part of the conversation at the moment, it's quite useful if you put a link in there. That saves me a bit of time, and then I know, yep, that's kosher. I can put that letter on my short list. Very quickly, things not to do. Don't get personal. Don't get personal about politicians or about other letter writers, or make assumptions about other letter writers.
We know it's hard.
I'm not saying don't make jokes, but it's just there's a tonal thing that you've got to be careful about. Don't misread what people have said and write, as Mark said, write this very impassioned letter, but it's based on a misreading of what someone has said. So I get very excited about the letter. I think, oh, this is well written. And then I look and I think, but that's not what so-and-so actually said. So it's really worth, just before you get all fired up, just double checking. So don't argue based on a false premise. And just keep it tight. The tighter the better, really. It's a good discipline, I think, to try and make it short and punchy and get to the point as quickly as you can. Like I just did.
Thanks, Julie. Yeah, well, sort of similar principles apply on the op-ed page, which is no longer the op-ed page, it's pages, and it's no longer opposite the editorial, which is what it used to be. So it's now, we call it the comment page because it's people's opinions. And as I said, in those olden days when it was the realm of the houndstooth jacket and the leather patches and the pipe smoking sort of old men of the newsroom, as Damien Murphy has always called it, it was a different area. It was a more thoughtful area of the paper, which it still remains. However, obviously you can't smoke in the newsroom anymore, and things have sort of shifted in some ways. The role was always kind of seen as the Voltaire of the newsroom, in that I may not agree with what you have to say, but I'll defend to the death your right to say it. I don't know that he actually truly said that. It's always disputed that he was the one that actually said that. However, like in most newspaper stories, never let the truth stand in the way of a good story. So really, what I see my role is more as a choir conductor. So I have to assemble lots of different voices for the page. So, and they don't need to be singing from the same song sheet by any means. You've got to have a mix, which is you could have your very shrill sounding soprano, like say a Paul Sheen on the page. And then you could temper that with a more sensible bass note, like the sound of a Ross Gittins or a Peter Harcher, who has a very mellifluous tone to his voice. And I don't just mean how they sound, I mean how they write. And then you can contrast it by the complexity of an alto, which is like an Elizabeth Farrelly, that's really deep and rich and resonant, but you may not appreciate it until you sort of step back and have a look at it. And then you've got a lovely tenor tone of Waleed Ali, who brings a sort of a sensible sound to the page and ends the week on a note that I think always gets people thinking and responding. And he's a musician too, as he plays in a rock band as well as the many other 1,000 things he does. So that's kind of how I see my role. And in the mix, I try to get something for everyone as much as I can, something for mum, dad, the grandparents, the kids.
The editor.
Everyone, the editor's family, the editor's neighbours, something that...
Don't give too much away.
Jokes. No, just something that I think different people will be interested in, so it's something that could be light and frivolous in one column and something very serious on another. So it is, again, a bit like the letters. It reflects the diversity of the city. But, I mean, really, the main criteria for a piece for me, for a piece of writing, is what Peter Fitzsimons always says to me after he's submitted a piece, is, does it sing? And I think you know what that means. You can read a piece of writing that really works for you, and I can tell you, I read hundreds a day. And if you haven't got me in that first few paragraphs, you're not going to get my readers either, because I read a lot of submissions. So, I mean, but that is the trick. That is the hard part. How do you make a story sing? So, in terms of what I look for, there's 5 things I sort of would say to you to do, and 5 things I'd say not to do. And this is what we call, in our new online world of journalism, the listicle, which is a mixture of a list come article. So the 5 things I would say is don't equivocate. Come down hard on an argument in an opinion piece, unless, of course, it's something that you're discussing, you find both sides lacking, say, in a political debate. But really let us know what your opinion is. It should be timely and provocative. What my former colleague Matthew Moore always used to say is the most important thing about journalism is the timing. That's so true. So be right on with the timing. It's okay to be controversial in your writing style. We love a bit of controversy, but not too outrageous. So, tell a tale, persuade without preaching would be my suggestion there. And don't overburden the copy with data. Sometimes, it should be just like a sprinkling of facts, not big text-heavy, data-heavy stuff that you'll overwhelm readers with. Just, one time, just a nut paragraph of the really important thing is all you need for that. And then ask yourself, most importantly, what is my opinion on this? Which is what I find so incredibly lacking often in the pieces that I get. I'll come away thinking, I don't know what that person was really trying to say. So make sure you have an opinion when you submit an opinion piece. So think about it in terms of what the headline could look like, would be my best description of that. And then 5 things not to do. Well, don't call me, because I get hundreds of submissions a day and I'll be right in the depth of reading one and really kind of focused on it, and the call will be, could you tell me what the email address is I need to send my opinion submission to? And it'll be, okay, it's Sydney Morning Herald, smhopinion@smh.com.au. It's all on the page. Take a look at the page in the newspaper to find out the address. Don't forget to write the subject matter in the headline when you send us an email, because that's very helpful for what I know I'll need for the day. Again, like Julie and Mark, there's just so much we need to sift through each day. It's just very helpful to know where to get a head start on that. Try not to send a Word document. If you can, write it in the body of the email, also very helpful. And don't be boring. I mean, can I tell you how many submissions I get that begin, they say Australia is the lucky country, or they used to say Australia was the lucky country. Just cliches, avoid cliches. Just write from the heart would be my best description. And finally, don't forget to use the word I. I think a lot of people in our newsroom have been trained not to be putting themselves in the story, but the difference about the opinion page and the comment page is that it can be about you. We're wanting to run it because of what your unique perspective is on the story. So don't be afraid at all to put yourself in the picture when you are writing an opinion piece. So, I mean, essentially the principles have remained the same since the days of journalism, early days of journalism. However, how we interact with readers is really the difference now. The online metrics tell us what you like to read, and that can be entirely different online to what can be on the page. And I have a quite good understanding, having been a long-term reader of the paper and now a reader online, of what the differences are. So just because something goes well online doesn't necessarily mean it's going to be a good thing for the page. So I've had a whole new sort of understanding of this role since we've become a lot more digital focused. Rob Ashton, the saint of many men, I tell you, he sits and reads moderates the comments that people respond to the stories, and it's kind of like going to a nudist colony of Sydney Morning Herald readers. It's a very scary thing sometimes.
Pretty.
It's certainly not pretty. It can be very, very confronting when you see how your readers respond. But again, they're very different audiences, I still believe, the digital readers and the print readers. So, there's a place for all of those, all different varieties of opinions. And I guess really all that I see when I am moderating these comments is what I'm running on the page, and that's a very rich variety of voices, like throughout the city, like we have throughout our newspaper.
That's great. Thanks, Helen. Fantastic. I'm sort of toying around whether or not to just briefly talk about editorials or whether just to throw it open for Q&A. So I'll be guided by you want to talk about editorials briefly? Mm-hmm. Great. I was hoping you wouldn't say that. So obviously all that we do, we take extremely seriously. I hope that's evident based on the previous discussions that have come out from my colleagues. Editorials is obviously arguably the most serious part of the newspaper and the newsroom, because it is what we consider to be our stance on things. It may be a quaint notion, but it's taken importantly as our position, and what we suggest is a position that represents our values, our take on the world. We may change over time, that's okay. We need to argue our change and why we've changed our position on things. I write the occasional editorial, but given the rigours of high office, I have a chief editorial writer. I'm not going to disclose his or her name. Why not? Very good question. I'm going to contemplate the why not through the course of the evening. But that person and I caucus regularly, as you'd expect, and so it's sort of like an ongoing conversation where I exchange my views on varieties of topics with him, and hear his views too, to challenge me and to exchange, in sensible conversation. From time to time, we gather as a team, a broader team. For instance, the most recent one was over the education changes. I was almost going to say reforms. The education changes foreshadowed in the budget. Any one of about 6 issues foreshadowed in the budget were big enough, we felt, in their own right to constitute an editorial on their own. They're profound changes, and so we gathered as a team and thrashed about the various issues. Similarly, on the cusp of elections, major headland issues, I gather a number of senior colleagues in the newsroom. I state a straw man position and want to argue it. I want to be persuaded. So that's what occurs. From time to time, I will give the chief editorial writer a spell, either have a go myself, that terrorises the newsroom, and myself at times. My most recent one was on Mike Baird's early days as Premier. Then from time to time I will consult someone who's more experienced on the issue to have a say about a particular subject. So that's the editorial issue in a nutshell. Where a recent arising is about how we will actually post our editorial on our digital site first, before actually having it republished in the newspaper, if the issue is of such considerable importance that we need to actually state our position sooner rather than later. Right, so that's a brief summation, I think. I might actually ask a question to get things rolling, okay? So, Julie, Mark, how do you verify the letters on the page? Like, I understand, I know that we go at great pains to actually establish who is writing the letter, to establish the veracity of the person or the organisation involved, something that in Rob Ashton's world of comment moderation, people can obviously post anonymously, as it were.
Yeah, so the first thing we do when we shortlist a letter is see if that person's been published before. And that means that person will have been through our rigorous processes and we can wave them through. If they haven't been published before, either I on a Sunday or during the weekday, our wonderful assistant Ben Willing will look if you're in the white pages, and we can match your number, your address and your telephone number on the white pages, and we say, yes, we know that person, they're out there. If that fails, we send it to the library, and we have property records that we can access. And if they can find that you own property, the address that you've given us, we go with that. If that fails, we'll go to the electoral roll and we'll try and see if we can find you on the electoral roll. But if we can't find you on the electoral roll, you might get a call from me or from Ben saying, could you tell us your middle name, please? Because that would help us find you on the electoral roll. So we'll go back to the electoral roll with the middle name. If that still doesn't work, we will ask you to send a smartphone photo. Smartphones have made this a lot easier, with some piece of official identification showing your name and your address, so the back of your driver's licence, for example, or a bill with all the financial details erased out. And that's a really good way of doing it, or a piece of mail.
And by then we'll allow you to open a Sydney Morning Herald bank account.
Yes. So it's not just good enough to say I'm a subscriber, because we actually don't link up with the subscriber. We have to go through those processes.
Very good.
There are actually people who try to write letters under a false name, so it's very important that we have genuine letter writers, and people are who they say they are.
I once had a letter writer.
It's fair to you as well as to us. You know.
I had a letter writer who signed himself so and so Long Paddock, and I looked in the library, and he'd been published in lots of other publications, in the Age and in the Australian. Joe so and so the Long Paddock. And I thought that's a really odd address, the Long Paddock. So I rang him up, and he was a swaggy. When he said the Long Paddock, he meant he was travelling,
Right.
you know,
Wow.
he was on the Long Paddock.
Couches,
But no one had ever checked this before. He'd just been signed off as the Long Paddock for years and years on various publications. So in the end, he was registered on the electoral roll at his daughter's place in Manly. So unfortunately, even though the Long Paddock was a lovely evocative address, we had him in Manly.
I have a question about opinion. It may reveal my ideological bent, but it does seem to me that you offer an outlet for opinion by retired politicians, so Peter Reith, Amanda Vanstone, perhaps less recently. But I'm not sure if this is because you're attempting to offer balance by offering more outlets to ex-Liberals, but is the Sydney Morning Herald an appropriate venue, given your target audience, to allow politicians to offer their views? And again, it may reflect my biases, but I would prefer commentators who don't have an inherent, apparent ideological bent. Please give us the Waleed Alis and other who I may naively think are neutral rather than ex-politicians?
Great question. Helen Pitt.
It is a broad church, the Sydney Morning Herald. It would be my best description. And I think it is about a question of balance, definitely. And we do try to run retired politicians rather than current politicians, because everyone here knows I hate when I open the Pandora's box of opening the dilemma of running a politician, then having to run the opposition politician, because it's a total badminton court that we're going to go back and forth, or a tennis court. So I utterly understand that, which is why the difference between retired politicians is obviously they still have an ideological bent. They're trying to push something, but there is an element of wisdom where you can step back and look at. I mean, I actually truly believe Amanda Vanstone has some extraordinary observations and she's a female voice too, so I think she brings a lot to the page. For example, Clive Palmer, I have been courting for a long time because he's a maverick and had something interesting to say. Now, Clive is one of the rare politicians that texts you. He answers his own phone. He wrote his own he wrote his own opinion piece. Now, I deal with so many politicians, I tell you, that is very, very rare. So I also ran Mark Latham this week because, again, he's a retired politician, but I do also believe he's probably one of the best columnists in Australia, and I would love to have him. He's a Financial Review regular. So I have a pretty hard and fast rule about not wanting to run politicians because of that dilemma. However, there are always exceptions to that rule, and sometimes it's also just really funny or really right time, like Sam Dastayari talking about the lords and ladies when Tony Abbott made that announcement. That was just a really funny piece, and it went off online because people we had the video of him reciting a speech. And so, yes, there are exceptions to every rule, but I understand entirely. I think the trouble with politicians is they don't actually speak from the heart a lot, which is why Clive Palmer was so refreshing, because he actually did. So
we had a big response to Clive Palmer's on the letters page. I ran a couple of them. A very positive response. They all thought he made a lot of sense.
Yeah. And I think it was because of that.
It's an insurance policy for when he becomes President of Australia. Question over here. Thank you.
I've actually got two questions. First of all, I'm just a little bit confused when you said writing to other newspapers. If you could clarify that, that's question number one. Question number two, how relevant is it for your letter to refer to another letter that has been written? I mean, does that make the letter more relevant to the paper? But, you know, when you say writing to other like to the Australian, would that militate against getting a letter published in the Sydney Morning Herald?
If it's exactly the same letter, it would.
Oh, yeah, the same letter.
Yeah,
but you can write a week later to the
Yes.
Yeah.
Oh,
yes,
yeah,
yes.
I thought so.
Yes, it's more if you just write one letter and you send it out to 7
Oh, yeah,
publications.
yeah.
I don't want to pick up other publications and see
No,
exactly
no,
the
I
same
understand
letter.
that.
And if you do that, I write you a stern email.
Letter.
And say,
Yeah.
please don't do that again. I loved your letter. Please keep it with us.
Yeah.
Yes, it does help if you're referring to another letter, because we do also like to have a conversation going and to have people feel like they're part of a community who are batting ideas amongst the community. So, yeah, and so either referring to a letter or referring to something in the paper does keep that idea of currency and that idea of a city or readership talking to itself, talking amongst itself.
Okay. We have a gentleman over here.
Really nice to meet you all and prove at least that you're human. I've been writing the Herald since the 1970s, and I can only say that the letters are getting better, the comments page is getting better, and they're a joy to read. Unfortunately,
There's a catch.
I cannot understand, with 400 letters a day, how you can find somebody who gets 4 letters per month.
Well, we don't.
There are 3 people who have 4 letters,
Oh dear.
and the list goes on. So I'd like that answered. I'd also like to know why there were no letters on column 8's intrusion. Thank you.
Okay.
Gee, at some stage we're almost going to be able to treat that as a comment, but it's a question. So over to you. Thank you.
Well, the thing about, we do have a guideline, and that is that we encourage people to write as often as they want, but we can only publish 2 letters a month from each person and 1 letter a week from each person. And we try to make sure that that rule is followed. Sometimes we forget.
Or sometimes someone will write a cracker of a letter and you just think,
Yeah.
we're going to break that rule because it's going to be a better page for it.
But when we put the page together, we check that that name hasn't been published more than once in the previous month.
One guy got in twice in the one edition.
It happens. It happens.
When that happens, that's a mistake.
And we have letter writers who monitor the page daily and send us reports
It's the
about how
truth.
many we're running.
And, in
And we
fact,
love that.
The more help we get, the best.
that tends to happen a lot when people have just started or there's been some new technological process, and so...
Or Julian Marker on holidays.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's true.
I should pick up just quickly the column 8 issue, which I bear responsibility for. Here we are. It's like it was orphaned on the arts page. I took the decision to find it a happier home. I've received just as much consternation in the newsroom about the decision as I have with our readers, particularly with the letters editors over here, who obviously saw some of their acreage diminished. It's not a decision I took lightly. I did not suppress comment about the move, but saw it restricted in the column 8 itself rather than on the letters page. Maybe that's a decision I would revisit if I had the time again. I'm not going to move it for the time being. I don't want to move it all over the place so it confuses and confounds readers. The only other place I felt it could have been was, you know, now that we have 5 columns rather than column 8, which was obviously the old broadsheet reference, was probably on page 2. But maybe if you're encouraged to give some written feedback after tonight, you can give me some ideas about where you see it resting. It's, you know, it's the choice I made. Okay. I'll take one from over this side.
Julie, Helen and Mark, I've got to admit defeat because there's no way I'm going to write a letter before 9 o'clock in the morning. But what I want to know is, do you look for certain words in a letter? Having at one stage in my early career judged 25 words of less, and if it didn't have smiling teeth in it, we threw it out the window. But I've written 2 letters. Oh, no, I've had 2 letters published. I didn't even make the book. 2 letters in 40 years, I think, that I managed to get published. And the one that really hurt me was when I went to the taxation department and I criticised Paul Keating for not doing a tax return, and it happened to appear on my tax file when I was before the tribunal. Was there a word in my letter that you really picked out, or do you actually look for... Sorry, I'm being sarcastic here, but do you look for certain words when you read letters? Are there certain words that need to pop out so it can
Keating.
be read? He's gone, hasn't he? And my taxation bit's clear too.
Well, if Keating, the word Keating's at the bottom of the letter, the sign is written as a letter, we pay attention. No, not particular words, I would say. I mean, like Helen talking about things that she doesn't like, I'm a bit sick of poor fellow my country. If I see that, I will not print the letter, or at least I'll take that bit out because it's becoming very cliched in these times.
Or how un-Australian. It's a common one. The thing about the letters, though, if they're written concisely and the idea you want to express is in those first couple of lines, referring to what that issue is and what the story is for the day that you're writing about, that's got a better chance for us to read that quickly, understand what it's about, and put it in a category we might consider for publication.
Okay.
But if it's a long-winded one that's, turns into autobiography...
Yeah, but you should have picked that up, right?
Then you're probably best to submit it to Helen's page rather than as a letter. There's a lady down the front here who's been waiting patiently. Thank you.
I'd just like to ask about the privacy associated with having letters published and the suburb. I've had follow-ups to letters that I've written. I've had a physical abusive letter in my letterbox. And I've had many, many calls on my phone. People, and one person keeps ringing me still.
Dear.
And it's like stalking. It's quite scary because they actually know your address, and it's a worry.
Yeah, look, I think people who are prepared to write to the letters page and use their real name and their suburb are really brave, because you are prepared to put your name to your opinions. And there's a lot of people out there today who are expressing opinions but not being prepared to go that step further. And it is unfortunate that people then follow up in that cowardly way with people whose opinions they disagree with, stalk them in that way. And I know that there are quite a few letter writers who've had that experience and who've sent me the letters of abuse that they've copped, the pornography. It's something we've talked about at different times, but I think it's really something that unfortunately we can't do a lot about.
Do we need to put our suburb in there?
Yes.
Well, because
normally.
otherwise, what distinguishes the letters page from Twitter or comment, it diminishes that sense of this is a person prepared to get behind their opinions, I feel.
But there are occasions, Mark and Julie, where we would and do say name and address supplied.
Sure.
What are the occasions where we would?
We published a letter 6 months ago now from a woman who was being physically abused at home, and it was to do with that issue, of course. And she requested to have name withheld as well as her address, and we published that because it was very relevant. And just the other day, we had a regular letter writer who's a former judge who has always requested not to have his suburb published. We just say Sydney against his name when he writes about issues because he worries about this problem. So,
And if in cases of mental health issues or domestic issues, we will withhold the name. I mean, we don't do it lightly.
No.
If you are really having problems, you can go to the police. They will take some steps. I know people have done that. It's a very long-running problem. I think I know people who are long-standing letter writers who have had this happen to them 20 years ago.
Maybe one for us to talk about after the formal.
The fact that somebody's actually come to your letterbox and put a letter in
Yeah,
there that
I-
they haven't
Scary,
signed
yeah.
that is abusive is quite scary.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, thank you. We might talk about that as well afterwards. So we might go back to this side over here. Thank you.
Hi, Guardian Australia launched here a year ago, and their Commentaries free online network is quite lively and quite established. How do you plan to compete online?
Well, I think we do already. I think we have been doing the same sort of thing as The Guardian for as long as The Guardian. And the difference, I guess, is that we try to bring a local voice to, a Sydney voice to whatever the issue is of the day. Like, for example, we often will digitally first produce stuff that is going to go on the page before. And I mean, I certainly look around at all the various opinion pieces, the drama, the conversation, the Eureka Street. And so I think we are up there in terms of competing with what we get quickly up online. So, I mean, can you tell me how you think we're not competing?
Oh dear.
I think you are, definitely. But I guess I just wondered if you saw them as competition, and if there was anything about them that you admired in terms of how they've capitalised. They have many voices coming out on Comment is Free online, and obviously in the print edition you're restricted to how many voices you can publish online.
Helen, I might just take that on board and from a competitive sense as well. Obviously, we respect and admire The Guardian as another credible voice that takes its independence seriously. The Comment is Free issue is a not altogether simple one to tackle. I was the opinion editor online many years ago, and when one publishes work that is submitted by somebody for no recompense, then you have to, I think, apprehend the motive behind that piece. It doesn't mean to say it's not without merit. It can be somebody who is completely passionate about the subject and or well-meaning, but then there are some who will be just pushing a barrow and don't wish to be paid. So everyone, excluding Clive Palmer, is paid for their submissions on the op-ed page. That was a joke, by the way.
No, he didn't ask for payment. That's the beauty.
But anyway, I think it's a good piece. I think in serious response though, we see The Guardian as a competitor for sure.
First of all, just a comment in regard to something else I said earlier on about the tax office. Also, ASIO reads the letters page as well, because I was contacted once by ASIO and asked for an interview. And secondly, in regard to getting pornographic and getting material that you don't really like, the best thing to do is put a privately listed number. That's what I had to do, because I used to get anonymous letters, hate mail, and also get phone calls. Okay, apart from that, a question for Helen and also one for Julie and Mark. First of all, Helen, in regard to the opinion page, I'm just wondering as to what led you to, or I'm not sure whether you're responsible, but for Mark Sawyer to write an article recently about racism. It was a very juvenile article, I thought. It was just something that a 15-year-old could write. It just had no argument whatsoever, and I was just really disappointed with that particular opinion piece. And secondly, also, Richard Ackland going from the Herald, who I thought was just a brilliant commentator. I don't know whether you can comment on that.
You take the first one, Helen. I'll take the
Darren
Ackland
will take
one.
the second.
All right. And in regard to the letters page for Julie and Mark, I recently had a letter where I used the word, or I said, and it had FU and then blah, blah, blah. But it was really relevant in that particular letter. So I'm just wondering as to why we still have to have that, dot, dot, dot. I mean, we're all adults. We hear it every day. Kids as young as 7, 8, 9 years of age, you hear it at the bus stop, you hear it at work, you hear it everywhere. It's why we have to have it deleted.
Well, I remember running that letter, Con, and it's actually not to do with us, it's to do with the style of the newspaper. And yes, of course, we can all read that language and we're all mature enough to, but we are a family newspaper. We have to cater for, all demographics who might be reading the paper.
Peter. Yeah, we might come back to that in a second, sir. There's a couple of other things.
Mark Sawyer piece. I thought it was provocative. I knew it would get a reaction. And I do also believe, I've lived in several different countries, and I think the point of what he was trying to say was, we are all racist. And that is the underlying tone of that story. However you might have read the ins and outs or the intricacies of it, I think what he was saying had some validity, and I knew it would get enormous reaction, and it did on Twitter. But I think he was responding to Warren Ryan's piece. That's the important thing to remember. So when people sort of got overboard, we need a reaction, we need a response to Warren, we need a response to Mark Sawyer. Well, his already was a response to what is racism, what constitutes racism. It got a lot of people talking, and again, there's a fine line between offence and the right to free comment, but I felt in that particular case that he had a good argument that we've got these racist expressions in our language, smoke like a Turk, all those sorts of things, that what do they mean? And he shone a light on all of that. And I mean, for me, it was actually the sign of a good opinion piece because it got up a lot of people's noses, it got people responding. Again, that's a part of my role, I think, to provoke what this term racism means. And you don't want your tired old voices on this subject. It's a controversial subject, and it's due to have a little discussion about what it means to be a racist, I believe. So that's why I made that call.
And as for Richard Ackland, negotiations are continuing, and I'd expect to see him back on the Herald's opinion page in due course. He's a fantastic columnist and someone whose voice is much needed on the page.
In some of the overseas journals, there is a letter followed by a reply, followed by a reply, which goes on for several entertaining weeks. In the Herald, I only see a letter followed by a contradiction, apart from, I think, Mrs. Watson and her bathtub some years ago. Do you not get the reply to the reply to the reply, or do you not choose not to publish it?
Are you meaning by the person who, the same people having a conversation with one another?
Yes, sometimes I think they're academics with nothing better to do.
Yeah. No, I didn't make this editorial decision. It's been a long-standing decision. I'd say maybe the letters editor before me, or even the one before that, decided that it was that was a policy on the paper, and there was a lot of toing and froing and right of reply and sort of the tennis match between two people. And the feeling was that it cut down the opportunities for other people to speak, and that it could get a little bit dull after a while. So they just decided that the policy would be no right of reply. So we've stuck with that. Happy to hear any opinions to the contrary.
I don't know what the readership of the Herald is in regional areas, but it seems to me that there's a lack on the opinion pages about regional and rural issues. And I'm wondering why. I'm really wondering why. There are plenty of issues out there, the decline of some country towns, the impact of mining, agriculture itself, fishing, and so forth. Is it a conscious decision not to have material from rural areas?
No, it's not. We just don't get very many submissions from rural Australia, frankly. And I think that speaks to engagement. You know, we are a Sydney newspaper. I would like us to have a lot more regional interaction, but the truth is they are quite likely writing to the Wee War, advertiser or the Dubbo Liberal on an issue that they're particularly feeling very strongly about. I mean, on the issue of mining, I've reached out into a number of little communities and got, Phil Laird from the Lock the Gate Alliance, and I've got tentacles to things. I've got a very good submission on paid parental leave from a man who is a teacher in rural Australia, and I plan to run that soon too. But the thing is, it's sheerly a lack of submissions on those issues, because I do believe they're engaging with their own newspaper because that's their own local forum.
Maybe we need to go on the road, Darren.
It's a really good issue. It's a really good issue that you raise. I think we have tackled in an ongoing way the conflict of land use, particularly in my old area of the Liverpool Plains, but other places. Coal seam gas is well done, but that's just skimming the surface, isn't it, really, in terms of the complexity of issues that are confronting.
So what is the impact of the Herald in regional areas? Do you know the numbers?
So it's hard to know in terms of the digital presence, but in terms of the newspaper, probably about 1/3, give or take a bit, of our print circulation is what you'd say outside of Greater Metropolitan Sydney. So it's not insignificant.
If there's an article in the Saturday, say a book review, and the book reviews only get published each Saturday, does the comment on, say, a Spectrum or book review on a Saturday paper a letter have to be in the Monday paper, or would you consider publishing it in the following Saturday?
Usually we respond to the immediate day before with the letters.
So, yeah, if I don't make Monday, don't worry, I've missed my time. Is that
No, not necessarily. I mean,
Okay.
we consider all letters on their own merit, but obviously the immediacy of a letter is important. But with the reviews on Saturday, we do the page on Sunday for Monday, which refers back to the Saturday paper. And so, yeah.
Have a bit more time. Yeah. Shortlist, I assume that means that's just reserving you guys the right that if something better comes along, you're not going to be there.
Happen. We generally send a note saying you're on the short list, which means you're pretty close to being on the page. But things can happen at the last minute. Big news story could break and we decide we want to put some stories in there, or there could be a legal problem with it and we just got to, the lawyers say just get rid of it. So there could be some various reasons why what's on the short list doesn't actually make the page.
Now, I know you're very careful with the errors in the letters. I guess my question is to Helen. What about errors that are in the opinion pieces by your regular... What's the best forum if you wanted to comment on errors in the opinion piece? Is it through a letter?
Yeah.
Yes. Only through a letter. And column 8 also, there's a lot of errors, factual... I'm just talking factual errors there. Is your only redress to get a letter published? Is that the only way?
Or a correction or a clarification in the newspaper. But you'd probably still send that to the letters editors and or myself or the op-ed page. So all the editors on the newsroom floor take that responsibility seriously. If there's an error of fact, we got the date wrong, or we put the point, 0.08, it should be in 0.8. That's our job. We would do that both in the newspaper and immediately online. So it may not be a letter to the editor. It may be in an egregious circumstance. It all depends.
And does Heckler still exist? Forgive me if I don't know.
No, it doesn't.
Can I just add to what you are talking about there? We do have reader link as well, which is a fairly important point for all our readers to go to if they see mistakes and they want corrections. And you can write to reader link, and we have staff who look after your complaint and answer you.
One final, for the opinion pieces, I know it has to be relevant. So even if you just have to consider it, you have to think this is what our readers today would want to read. Is that it may not be a relevant news story, but it may, if you consider it something that your readers today might want to read, like a historical topic or something, not related to an exhibition. But I guess I'm just pondering whether it's worth submitting something that's not a direct news story at the moment.
Yeah, well, I mean, again, a well-written piece on a timeless subject is manna from heaven for me. But as a couple of the ladies are speaking to tonight who work for PR agencies, that can also be a bit of a kiss of death, because if it's not going to be run immediately, it'll go into my little backlog, which I'll use for a rainy day, but sometimes it does get lost in the mix. So then just a gentle prompt, a reminder, oh, have you still got that one on, blah, 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 you know, and that can be really, oh, you know, that's great. Or else I just sort of slot them away for when it does become relevant, because quite often, you know, it's a news cycle. That means it's going to revolve around to come back up to the top of the news cycle again soon.
A couple of weeks ago, I did a speech for a competition on the very entertaining and slightly useless phrase, un-Australian. And what I want to know is, how often do you get it in there? And what have you had to describe it, if you can think of any off the top of your head, basically? And I could tell you all about un-Australian, but that would take a whole 3 minutes and 53 seconds.
That's my
0.59.
Just in case anyone...
The Dorothy Dixer.
The Dorothy Dixer. Question time. We do get un-Australian a lot. And I suppose we might generally cut it out if we're going to run the letter. I don't think it would necessarily kill the entire letter, but... and it can be used to describe anything and everything these days.
I was just curious what effect the online commenting has had on the letters page, whether it sort of stimulated it or diminished it. And also, I don't know whether this is the right question to ask here, but I noticed it's only some articles you can comment on online, and I was wondering how that decision is made.
You take the first.
Okay. Look, I just think there's been a blossoming of comment along across a number of platforms. I think people have never been more prepared to put their opinions out there, or more hungry to do so. So I don't think we've suffered from the fact that there is a lot of different ways that people can make their opinions known. I think we're getting more letters than ever, particularly the budget has just been phenomenal. So sustained.
We also on the Sun Herald, I do the Sun Herald letters too, and if you look at the Sun Herald letters page, we only have the letters at the top, and there's a thing we call forum underneath, which is all social media comment, and so that gives another outlet for what you're talking about.
And you're right, not all comment pieces are open for comment. It generally is to do with the subject matter. If it's about, say, a legal case, quite often we won't, or sexual abuse, something that could really rile readers and force them to write lots of defamatory things, we'll not open them. Equally, it's a matter of staffing, because poor old Rob needs to have a lunch break and his team need to have a break because, you know, trust me, it's like an echo chamber in there. So it's a question of staffing, but it's generally more subject matter that we will close, the sensitivity of a subject that we will close the comments on.
Back in the, years ago, I think when, web sensibilities were still being developed, there was a view that pretty much anyone could have their say on any topic, using whatever language they wanted to, because the web was just this free place for people to play. We err on the side of caution, I think. We want to have a tight comment moderation view. And in my experience, the moderator sets that bar. So if you want to, allow anything to go through, then people will lowball when it comes to the commentary that is allowed. But if you keep the tenor and the tone right, and I hope I'm reflecting your views on this, Rob, then people will, that's what the moderator is there for, to moderate the discourse.
Are you saying that the 400 letters you get are just then finished for the day, or if there's some issue that is ongoing, would there be letters that you would carry over for perhaps 1 or 2 days, or...?
I sometimes, if I've closed off the page for that day, but letters are still coming in, and one comes in that I think, oh, that's nice, I'll sock it away and I'll come back to it the next morning. Now, by the next morning, it may well, the caravan has moved on so greatly that it's been left behind, or it might just be such a sort of self-contained and interesting idea that it'll make it. So it's not that a letter dies after just 24 hours, but it does get a bit harder to get it in. Like Helen was saying, it sort of drops down your radar a little. Do you do the same, Mark?
Yeah, we look at the letters too. The letters come 24 hours a day. And as I said at the beginning, the bulk of them we use coming in the morning. But When we finish the day's work, when we come in the next morning, we go back to where we left off and we look at all the letters that have come in overnight from, say, 6 p.m, say, when I finished the night before.
With the comment page, do you find that some writers, like a conservative writer, Peter Breath, for example, would stipulate or would require that he doesn't appear on the same page as another writer that he doesn't want to appear on the page with?
No, he doesn't have a say in that. But he's...
Helen might.
he appears on Tuesday. It's generally a question of, I like to have 2 reliable voices on the page that I can, regular columnists, that's sort of like an anchor for the page, how I describe it, because you know that they will be good, and then you can mix the rest of the topics amongst contributors or people that you commission. So that's something set in stone just to make our lives as editors a little easier, so we know who we can rely on what day.
Okay. I'm getting the wind-up signal from the back and there's still hands going up. So we're going to linger, if you'll allow us to, after this formal end. But I really thank you very much for all of your questions and your engagement tonight. Like I said, we take your loyalty very seriously, and we're really encouraged to do more of these things. Really want to hear your feedback about things that we do, even column 8. You know, I think it's seriously. You know, again, I'm here at the moment thinking, yet again, we still haven't allowed enough time for Q&A, and so maybe we'll continue to refine this. I think this is the 3rd or 4th time we've done this, and we're sort of, you know, finessing things as we go. I mean, I'm still thinking about the incredible day when Qantas was grounded and the entire letters double page had no space for anything other than Qantas. And another question we could ask is, what does the letters page have to reflect the absolute volume of the letters that get into? But anyway, that's something else we can have when we do part 2 of this. And also the fabulous unearthing, in my view, of on Helen's territory of Waleed Ali. If there's anybody who can negotiate complex issues in an apolitical way, it is that gentleman, and we are very gifted to have him as part of our stable at the moment, and we're arm twisting him to be an even more regular person on the page. So well done, Helen. Thank you again, all, and if we're going to hang around for a few moments afterwards, I'd encourage you to do so as well, but thank you very much for having us tonight. Thank you.